Okay, well, firstly, I just want to say to the all the lovely ladies that are organising this conference, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of it. It's quite something new that I didn't know much about before. So just kind of seeing the conference and a couple of the talks that have been going on, I think it's a wonderful community you guys are building. So it's a pleasure to be able to take part. So today I will be talking about, as you can see, using local woods. It's something that's very important to me, and it's something that's become quite prominent in the way that I build. So to just give you a quick overview of what I'll be talking about, I will go through the types of woods that I use, how receptive I've found my market to be when pitching these woods to my clients. I know you guys had a talk yesterday about CITES and sustainability practices. So just to let you know, I'm not going to be going into those details. But what I hope to do with this talk is inspire you to look maybe, into the local woods that are in your area, perhaps just in your country, and maybe just give you a little bit more confidence in considering them to introduce them into your builds, and how you can kind of with confidence start to talk to your customers about potentially their pros, their cons, and how they can be used within your builds. So I think we had a little bit of a background about me, but just to go over it in case none of you have met me before, I started Turnstone Guitar Company, which is purely acoustic steel string guitars, in 2015. We are based in England, and the company is named after the turnstone bird, which you can see on British shores. I started, as you've probably heard through my bio, I've gone through a bit of twists and turns before I became a guitar maker, but started going to a part-time evening course approximately 11 years ago, whilst I was working full-time in the charity sector. That escalated from there. After a year of doing that, I wanted to learn more, so I got in touch with a repairer on Denmark Street, which is quite a famous street in London, that does guitar repairs. I started doing weekends in my spare time, learning about repair. And again, a year into doing that, I started an internship with a luthier, a steel string acoustic luthier in London. And I did that part-time for 2 years, tying in with a paid job as well. 2 years into that, I moved into my own workshop, started to build my business, and that again went on for 2 more years, working part-time in London in the charity sector, kind of living a bit of a double life at the time, but it kind of enabled me to start to build up my name, get a couple of orders in to the point where I felt I had the confidence to go full-time, which I have been doing since 2017. Now, it was around the time of my internship that I started to become interested in English woods. So I will take you on to the next slide. So I think it's important at this point to just mention sustainability, because it can be a bit confusing. And I think it's important to say that this isn't technically sustainable wood that I'm using, i.e. I'm not replanting, or the suppliers that I'm buying it for aren't actively replanting everything that they're taking. What I often do buy is wood that's naturally felled for natural or necessary reasons. So it is kind of sustainable in that you're good environmental practice, because I'm using wood that would have otherwise potentially gone to waste or used in other areas, but it's not technically sustainable or something along the lines of FSC, where wood is replanted as soon as you use it. But just to go back, so the reason why I became interested in English woods were three main reasons why. In my internship, I started to learn about English woods and the different species and the varieties that we have. And I think much like any country, there are lots and lots of species that are grown in England. It's hardwoods, softwoods. I never knew before getting into this the sheer number of species and beautiful trees that grow in this country, but interestingly, how many of them could actually be used in guitar making. This really, really excited me, so I wanted to find out more. A second reason is during my internship as well, my mentor would often say to me, like, oh, I don't know if you've heard, but the situation with rosewoods is looking pretty bleak. I, being fairly young and hoping potentially for a long career, you know, you need to start thinking about what you might do in the future if rosewoods become unavailable. There's obviously the situation with Brazilian rosewood in guitar making, which has already gone beyond kind of, you know, what's viable to be used. So this worried me to a certain degree. I am thinking, well, yeah, what am I going to do if there's no rosewoods that are available for me to build my guitars with? So I was looking maybe for other viable options, but also at the beginning of my career, when I hadn't established a reputation, it's kind of an opportunity for me to take that leap and maybe experiment a little bit more when I have not kind of, when I'm not so established, I'm not charging so much that I can, you know, take a few gambles and try a few things. Thirdly, from a business perspective, as you heard, I've come from a bit of a marketing background. So I do kind of think, well, from a business perspective, how am I actually going to pitch myself as a business? Starting to think about, again, this is a saturated market. I don't think there's any need for another guitar maker to come into the fore. What am I going to do to differentiate myself? How am I going to be seen as unique or different? And me being from England, potentially using English woods, kind of ties in nicely with the Turnstone Guitar Company brand as well, that it could just be something that I could potentially, you know, help me stand out and have a bit of a unique selling point. So this developed what into I can describe as, or actually before I go into that, what I wanted to say was, okay, so I've got an idea, I think this could work, but is it actually going to translate into a good sounding guitar? I had no idea. When I moved into my first workshop, I went through kind of a year's phase of developing models, just kind of, I still had a lot to learn, so really refining my skills. What I decided to do at that point was to develop a model which became my TG model, which is a grand auditorium acoustic guitar. I would build one that was made out of traditional woods and one that was made out of English woods. That way I could kind of drill down the parameters of a certain number of variables to be able to see whether, when in close comparison to one another, whether what the English wood sounded like in comparison to something more traditional. When I got to the end of that, I built these two guitars, and without going into too much detail, because I'm just conscious of the time as well, that I was really pleased with the results. So much so that, you know, I knew that it was something that I wanted to keep on doing, and I started to feel confident that it could potentially be something that the market may become interested in. So as that developed, that moved into what I would create to be called my E-series model. So when I was researching into English woods, something that I became slightly obsessed over was taking it a step further. So not just using one thing that was English wood, so say it's got an English back and sides. I became obsessed to the point where I wanted everything to be made out of English wood. What the bracing could potentially be made out of English wood, what the soundboard could be, what the bridge could be, what the internal bracing, all the tiny bits of the guitar that you probably don't even think about. I wanted to think, what could I potentially use in English form? That then led me to kind of the creation of what I call my E-series model, i.e. English series model, which is a model made out of completely English grown timber. I think the timing of this is also kind of important as well, because if you remember, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, relating to CITES, there was a time when all of the Dalbergia species went on to Appendix 2, which meant that there was a lot more paperwork to export rosewoods. It was a lot more cost associated. So, you know, to a certain degree, just the future of rosewoods, even though we had worried in the past, it was looking much more concrete that we really didn't know what was happening with rosewood. So even the market was starting to read the stories about the Gibson saga, and everybody was just a little bit more aware of thinking, the situation with rosewoods is precarious. So the timeliness, I think, of me actually pushing this E-series English wood thing was very good, because it was at a time when people started to really wonder what the future of rosewoods were. Obviously now we know that they've de-escalated societies, but I still think it's an important thing to start to push and encourage the market to think of alternative timbers. I also think from a marketing point of view, labeling it the E-series model, it just gives something for people to kind of cling on to, but it also gives me something that I can push fairly hard with confidence to say, this is my E-series model, this is what it's about. I talk about it a lot in videos that I make. I have a section on my website. So it's just something that I have labeling it and the kind of the aesthetics behind it all kind of tie in together for something that I can fairly confidently say, yeah, this is what I do, or this is an aspect of what I do, and here's the information about it. So I guess what leads me to, once I've got it, but then you could turn around and say to me, well, aren't customers really conservative? And I think it's important, as obviously I know a lot of you are violin makers, different instrument makers. I can't speak for your market, because you could just be looking at me in disgust at the moment thinking this is just ridiculous. I couldn't even comprehend using something that's not traditional. So obviously I'm speaking within the experience of the acoustic steel string market, but I would still like to think that, however far you decide to go, I think there is some elements that you can take from my talk, but it really does depend on the instruments and the markets within which you work. So you could, and a lot of people said to me when I started doing this, you've got to follow the market. You get taught, build what people want to buy. So to a certain degree, I do agree with that. And I do use traditional woods as well. So it's important to say that. But I do believe that if you believe in something passionately and you can communicate it well with your audience, you actually have a lot more power than you think to sway people and alter market preferences. My experience is with my clients and just people who are very into this, especially the steel string market in general. People love knowledge and they love information. They want to talk about the guitar, they want to learn more. So when you kind of come at a slightly different angle and you want to talk about something that maybe they don't know much about, different woods, backgrounds to where trees grow and all of this, the history of some of the woods, they want to know about it because this is what they're passionate about. So don't be scared in that respect that people aren't interested. They are interested. They may be unsure whether it's going to translate into an instrument that they want. That comes a bit later, but they are interested, I think is important to say. So I would say, don't be afraid to introduce new species of wood into your builds if you feel that they're fit for purpose. And again, that's another important thing, if they're fit for purpose. So about 70% of my guitars that I build, so I build about 16 to 20 guitars a year, I would say about 70% of my guitars have an element of English wood. And it's for me to kind of decide, or well, for the customer really to tell me to what degree. So I have a scale of the full E series, a hybrid, which includes English woods and perhaps maybe a more standardized wood on the top or the back or the neck, or a completely traditional wood guitar. So it's important to establish kind of where your clients are coming from to know where to veer them. But I would say about 70% of my guitars that I build, about 16 to 20 a year, 70% of them have an element of English wood. I would say about 40% are full E-series models. So it is a fair part of my business. And it definitely is something that I think has brought additional success to me, being able to stand out and grow my name and being known for it. And I would say as well, the more that I have built with English wood, the more confident I become that they are up to par against the traditional woods. So I think as well, that is something to be said for the more you use wood, the more you become acquainted with its pros and cons and how you can apply it to different playing styles. And that comes from experience. So it's kind of getting your hands on the wood and building the instruments and seeing what the outcome is to know how you can use it and adapt it. I just see how I'm doing time-wise. Okay, we're okay. So I thought what you might find interesting is just some pictures of examples of guitars that I've built. I'll talk through the woods that I've used and anything of interest on those woods. So this is a grand auditorium size model, and this on the top I've used Western red cedar. Western red cedar is quite a popular wood, but more sourced from North America traditionally. This is English grown Western red cedar, and I've built many guitars. This was actually the first soundboard that I used when experimenting with English wood, and I'll get onto why I chose that to be my first option a little bit later. On the back and sides is a wood called bog oak, which, again, talking about people being interested in woods, this is a really interesting one. It comes with a lot of history coming from England. It's a 5,000-year-old wood that was buried in peat bogs. The carbon turned it this black color and increased the density of it. It's basically oak that has been in peat bogs for 5,000 years, and people just, and what happens during that process is that the wood becomes denser, and it equates sometimes something close to ebony. So it's a quite dense, heavy wood, and for a back and sides that can impart a character that's really full of bass, strong sustain, but more than anything, people love the story about it. So even before, if they've tried one, they're always interested in it. So it may be in your country you have woods that have these stories attached to them, as well as being aesthetically beautiful. If you can talk about them, it just gets people engaged and interested in the subject. On the neck, I've used English ash, which is a very plentiful tree in the UK. And on the rosette, which is the detailing around the sound hole, that is English elm burr, which aesthetically is just a beautiful wood. And it's finding out about these woods and seeing that, you know, they actually grow. Well, you know, I know that there's an elm tree just up the road that's got a fantastic burr on. I just want to go with a chainsaw and chop it off, but I can't. But, you know, these woods are literally on, you know, on my doorstep. And how beautiful they are. It's just kind of incredible. I get really, really excited about it and talking about it. And I think that, you know, customers can see that. Moving on to another one. This is my mid-sized acoustic guitar model. Again, every single element of this guitar has been made out of English wood. We have cedar of Lebanon, but English grown. And that's also something to say that they don't necessarily have to be, well, in what I've chosen to use is woods grown in the country. They don't necessarily have to be indigenous, i.e. they weren't introduced. They were in this country, whereas we have a lot of trees now in this country that were introduced from other countries, but grow very successfully here. And cedar of Lebanon is one. It's kind of slightly harder than Western red cedar, so it has a little bit more bite and attack on the soundboard. On the back and sides is one of my favorite English grown woods, English cherry. It's kind of similar to mahogany in properties, has a really sweet liveliness to it, and aesthetically you can see, I mean, I don't dye or color any of these woods. They're all the natural colors of the woods. And that on the neck you can't really see too much, but I've used English walnut. And on the inlay, again, another burr wood of oak this time. The fingerboard is an interesting one. This is a wood called laburnum, and I'll talk a little bit about properties, but it has a beautiful waxy feel to it. So for a fingerboard, it just feels really, really nice under the fingerboards. So I really enjoy using that, and I think players do as well. This is another example with the laburnum on the fingerboard and bridge. English yew for a soundboard. English back and side, English walnut back and sides, sycamore neck, which is quite similar to maple. And this one in particular was a client who had an affinity to hornbeam trees, which he lived near a forest in London, which is quite well known for the hornbeam trees, and he wanted to integrate it. So I did into the binding around the rosette and into the slotted headstock. So my customers come from, well, people interested in these guitars don't just come from England as well. I have American clients that usually have some loose connection to England that want these types of guitars, but this is a prime example of somebody who, yeah, he has an affinity to some English wood, and he wanted to connect that in, and it actually then got me thinking about using hornbeam, which I'd never done before. So yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting exercise through engaging with clients as well, and them coming up with some ideas of things that they've come across and how you can integrate them into your builds. What I would say, so some of the things that I was talking about there were about physical properties and things to consider when it comes to sourcing your own local woods. I think as a starting point, it's when I first started getting into this, when it was fairly early on in my career, and I would say I had a bit of a gung-ho attitude that possibly stemmed in lack of experience. So were I to go into considering some of the timbers now, I would probably be a little bit more reserved than I was back then. But I think actually doing it fairly early on gave me, using materials that I may have swayed against, actually they have turned out to be really, really good. So it's finding that balance there. But what I would say as an advice of somebody that's gone through it, advising somebody else, is to start, when considering new materials, try to find materials that replicate the physical and structural properties of the woods that you're trying to substitute. So as an example, so the very first instrument that I used English wood was using English walnut on back and sides. English walnut is a fairly popular wood in guitar making to be used on back and sides, so it wasn't out there that I was considering using it. In which case you can start to think, well, what other woods on back and sides could I potentially use English, what falls within the physical properties of back and sides? What do you want to achieve from your back and sides? As an example, mid-weight woods, fairly reflective, something traditional, which could be mahogany, that could maybe be substituted for something like walnut and cherry, which do have fairly similar physical properties to mahogany. In the maple world, so for violin makers, I know maple is a massively popular wood. Maybe, so in England we have a wood called sycamore, which is in the maple species family. We also have a wood here called London plane, which aesthetically and physically is slightly different, but it's within the maple family. So it's something like that, okay, well, it's within that territory. Let me experiment, let me buy some and see what you think about it, basically. For acoustic guitars on a soundboard, for example, physically we are looking for something that's high tensile strength with relatively low weight. So when I considered using Western red cedar, obviously that was tried and tested, but English grown, and then that gave me more confidence to try things like cedar of Lebanon, English yew, and even woods that I haven't yet used, but I have that fall into this remit, is something like larch, has massive high tensile strength, a little bit more weight though, so that's where you have to kind of be careful about understanding the materials that you're using, or something like Douglas fir. And I guess that links to your own experience, depending on how you work. If you are fairly in tune with how woods feel to the touch, to the tap, that experience is of huge value when you start to consider new different woods. If you prefer a more scientific method for evaluating your materials, then that is absolutely fine. Deflection testings, tensile strength testing, which also links to a point. There is a project called the Leonardo project, where I think it was conducted in Belgium. I can provide a link if anybody's interested, but they conducted a lot of tests of like tensile strength of different local woods. Their students all built local wood guitars. So they had a fair bit of funding to research this kind of stuff, and it's really interesting to see the amount of woods that you could actually consider, for example, for a guitar neck, which just so many people just assume to use mahogany. But when you actually start to consider the physical properties of mahogany and what the other woods potentially have that correlate, the options are a lot wider than you think. The other thing is to ask, has anybody else used this wood before? When I first used English yew for the first time, I really wasn't sure, because like I say, soundboards need to be high tensile and lightweight. Yew is a little bit heavier, but you hear about mahogany tops and greater weight tops still being used. So I kind of knew that it could potentially be an option. And there was a luthier based in the north of England called Gary Southwell who had used yew. So I made a point of talking to him and I said, you know, what was your experience with it? Would you recommend it? And he said, yeah, absolutely. I loved it. And that just gave me that little push over to feeling confident to at least giving it a go. So I would say that if there is anything that you're interested in but unsure about, I'm sure there is somebody that has used it to a certain degree. Get in contact with them. I'm sure they would love to just share what they think about it, which may help you, you know, take the plunge if you did want to have a go with a wood that you're more unsure about. The other thing is aesthetics. Now, I think you can find your own balance here with whether you prefer to kind of fit something that's more aesthetically agreeable to the market, or if you want to be out there, like that's absolutely fine, whatever. But the way that I've chosen to build is to kind of push parameters with the materials that I'm using, but aesthetically kind of keep things to a certain degree what people would consider acceptable. So for example, the fretboards people normally expect to be black. So I started using bog oak, which is naturally black. Physically, the properties suit being used for a fingerboard and bridge. But as well, people just, you know, they expect it. The laburnum as well is slightly different, but again, it's just finding an aesthetic that's not too jarring or unusual. That's just what I've chosen to do. So that's just to say that consider the aesthetics to make sure that, you know, things are still looking how you want them to, even though you're introducing new materials. So I think that is pretty much it. But I guess I would kind of just round up by saying that I've massively enjoyed kind of my adventure into finding these local woods. And I think from a market perspective, it really is important for us to start showing and standing behind these woods and saying, you know, we can build great instruments out of different woods. So I would really encourage you, maybe not to the degree that I've done it, but just think about using potentially one new different species of wood within your build. And I would also just say that it has I think to a certain degree led to the success of my business, being able to kind of have this unique selling point. So I certainly don't think it's detrimental to the success of a business to do something that's slightly unusual, and I would definitely encourage you to do it. I don't know if I have any time for questions, but I would more than welcome them if we have time.
So we actually we're about to run out of time, so I don't think we're gonna have time to get through all the questions. You have 7, quite popular. You got a lot of people curious about this. What we'd like to do, if we're able to, is send you the questions to be able to share with everyone later on. A quick question we can ask just to satisfy some of them is, where are you getting the wood from? Are you going and harvesting the trees yourself at all?
So I have 2 angles. Some of my luthier supplies actually sell me pre-prepped tops and backs, not like pre-made, but you know, in the panel, in the book match pairs. For things like necks, I've started to go out to the local sawmills, and then I do buy it in lumber form, and I chop it down. But yeah, I mean, if you've got the storage and the ability to dry wood, then you can billets of trees are perfect, but you would be surprised to know that maybe some of your local luthier suppliers may actually have these woods in stock as well. So yeah, I would encourage people to ask.